And we're gonna go back to this, yes. Okay, so we're gonna finish.
Were we able to get a copy? I just sent it. I just texted you that.
Oh, okay.
So I think we need something to bring this off the table since it has been tabled.
I move to remove this matter from the table.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved in second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So during our brief recess, I provided the board members and staff with a copy of INRI SW. The decision itself uses proper party names. For purposes of this discussion, I'll continue to use initials. The districts at issue were Abbott City, Truesdale, the resident district, and Storm Lake, the proposed receiving district. They're adjacent to each other. And if you folded Iowa in half along I-35, it's roughly the same distance away from I-35 as AGWSR and Hampton Dumont. So one in the north east quadrant of the state, one of the in the northwest quadrant of the state. The decision in SW does not describe the distance between the house and the school, but the decision in SW did walk through family hardship. And the parent in this decision was a person who had cancer and felt that it would be unable to attend. Quote from the top of page 70, her illness has added to the difficulty with having two children in two different school districts. So if you sort of balance the equities and balance the hardships between those that Ms. M.A. described and the parent in SW, my predecessor, Anne-Marie Brick, Judge Brick, did a fairly good job of walking through prior board precedent. She and your predecessors on the state board found that the condition in SW, the facts in SW were not a unique situation crying out for state board intervention. And so it's not apples to apples, but it's fruit to fruit. It's a weighing of family hardships. And that's why, the law is identical. If you want to click back up one level to the factual situation, I'd leave it to your judgment about whether or not those facts, whether one set of hardship is greater or less than the other. And most importantly to me, as it was important to Judge Brick, it was controlled by a prior precedent from a prior state board decision. Requirement of good cause was not met when a parent wanted a younger child to attend the same district as an older children who attended based on a sharing agreement. That was not an open enrollment. It was a sharing agreement, good cause question. But the state board there, the circumstances make the decision difficult, but do not compel the state board to enlarge the good cause exception. So that's my elevator speech on SW. Unfortunately, there's no comparable, as a real estate agent would say, as to distance. So I would leave it in your judgment as state board members to sort of weigh hardship to family, if hardship to family is going to be part of your calculus. And for future reference, this wouldn't have worked today because of links being under maintenance, but for future reference, the current practice now in decisions is to add in clickable links. So if I cite a case, there will be a clickable link in the PDF, a hot link in the PDF, which wouldn't help today because maintenance, but that will be my practice going forward to address circumstances like this.
Okay.
I want you to be able to do what my 9th grade geometry teacher could not do, and that is see my work.
Thing about the open enrollment dates changing over the years.
Well, I wanted to see this just to see if there was any way to distinguish this. I think I'm now more convinced than ever that they're on all fours. I mean, obviously the cancer, the health situation. Really don't know how far the SW home is from either school, unlike this particular case, we know it's 40 minutes versus 20 or something drive. Maybe this would be better dealt with in some kind of a rule as opposed to a decision by us at this table, you know, at a hardship, you know, to give us somewhere to go here. So given that, just for the sake of moving this along, I'll move that we affirm the administrative law judge proposed decision to, help me here, MG, am I saying it right? Right?
There is a pending motion on the table, and that is,
Oh, geez, I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
and so
I seconded it, so I'll withdraw that, but now you know how I'm gonna vote,
Okay, so
unfortunately.
what do we do with that motion?
There's a
We vote-
motion, Mike made a motion.
But you just withdrew, wait, you seconded and so you withdrew your second?
No,
Oh, wait, what?
I just withdraw what I said about
Oh,
motion.
Making a new motion.
oh, okay. So we have to deal with Mike's, okay. It's been moved and was there a second?
I did second.
Oh, you, okay. So should we vote on that? And then,
yes,
okay. And we're gonna do a roll?
We do a roll
yes,
call?
please.
Okay, can you read the motion?
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
Uh,
Good idea.
You want me to read the motion? The motion made by Mike May was to allow MG to enroll out of AGWSR to Hampton along with the siblings.
To affirm that, to modify the ALJ's decision and reverse the school board.
Axiotis,
No,
Bradley,
No,
Kane,
No,
Nedler. Oh, sorry, May,
yes,
Robbins,
no,
Wayne. Yes.
Motion fails.
So we need since the motion fails, there's no action yet on the proposed decision. So we would need at least as to that portion of the proposed decision, we would need a motion and a second regarding the disposition of that portion of the proposed decision.
is there a motion?
In the form of the motion, it would be adopt the proposed decision affirming the school board decision
so moved.
For MJ?
for MG.
I'm sorry, MG.
Or MG, so moved.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Roll call, please.
Oh, sorry.
Axiotis,
Aye.
Bradley,
Aye.
Kane,
Aye.
May,
No.
Robbins,
Aye.
Wayne. No. No, she said.
She said no.
They said no.
Yeah.
So the minutes will reflect this discussion, but the ultimate decision in the minutes will reflect sort of the struggle that the board had with this decision. And I think that it is good that they so reflect because these are important discussions, both for the family as well as the broader school community. So thank you for, to steal a word from the superintendent, digging into, or steal a phrase from the superintendent, digging into this problem and being thoughtful and careful for all sides. And so, Madam Chair, may I be excused.
Yes, yes, you may. Thank you so much.
Legislative item on the agenda coming up. I'm just thinking out loud and maybe for consideration either today or next meeting. Do we want to look at proposing something for the DE to the legislature to modify situations like this? Just a thought.
That's what I had written down on my sheet too.
I would like to see us do
Yeah.
something in this this regard, because I'm not happy with it, but I think our hands are tied.
Made a note of that.
Thanks, Larry.
Back to top.
Right, I did say. Do we know what this is? I don't know what this is. Do I know what that is? I would go ahead with the agenda. Right,
Ready?
yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. We have two educator prep program approvals for you today. First, I'd like to, though, if some of you that haven't met my colleague, Dr. Miriam Rodzabo back here, she's been with us for about a year, and the programs that she's been leading the reviews on, she'll bring those to you coming up. So you'll see her up. She gets to sit in the chair pretty soon. The first one we're going to bring to you is St. Ambrose University, and I should explain a little bit about St. Ambrose. Remember, Robbins had asked me about the length of the process, and St. Ambrose is unusual. St. Ambrose had, we should have reviewed them about 2 years ago, but they had a problem with basically a mismanagement of the review process and some of the issues that were going on there by the previous director. So St. Ambrose, we brought them to the board because of the way their previous approval was written. We had to bring them to the board to ask for an extension, and you granted that about 1.5 years or so ago. We went back to them, met with their provost and others, and said, you need to redo these things. And there were some problems there. It turned out that that director had some serious illness and actually passed away as he was working on these things. So that delayed us a bit more, obviously. So the university put in place as an interim director, and now the full director, Dr. Eugene Betchen, who is online with us. There he is, good. And so he's a director of School of Education. And I wanted to bring all that up because they had some serious work to do, which is reflected in the report that we've provided for you. But I want to talk about what that work is and what they've done. So, and for those of you, again, that are new to this, the way the report that we provide you is structured, the first 5 or 6 pages are our summary. According to the standards that every program is required to meet, we give you an examination of how they are aligned with those standards, how they meet those standards. The rest of the report, the bulk of the report, is our full report to them, to St. Ambrose, and then their full responses to us verbatim. The only thing we've done, if there was a faculty member that we called out by name for not doing the 40 hours or something like that, we redacted that faculty member's name in the public document. But otherwise, we haven't edited their words. St. Ambrose is located in Davenport. It's a university that offers degrees at bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. For our purposes, they offer programs in teaching, both elementary level, secondary level, and then specialists like art, music, PE. They also have a master's program in school social work and a master's program in speech language pathology. And we don't have very many of those programs in the state. The program does have strong support from the university administration. And that was evident in how they worked with us as they were going through some issues around the changes in their departmental administration. And they have very strong full-time faculty in their department. I should mention that the graduate program, social work and speech and language path, we don't have any compliance issues found in those programs at all. The team made a number of recommendations to them, which they've accepted and they're incorporating into their work, but there were no compliance issues. The compliance issues that we found were with teacher preparation. And they centered around that oversight, that governance, and the problems that were caused there. In the governance standard, the thing that drove a lot of this is their conceptual framework. Every program is required to have a conceptual framework. What is it that they believe? What's their research base for preparing teachers the way that they prepare teachers? And theirs was outdated. The research was old, and it just wasn't aligned with current best practices and current standards and current requirements. So they had to redo that completely. And as a function of redoing that, that causes them to redo their assessment system and their alignment with standards and their knowledge, skills, dispositions, their curriculum, and all those things drive from that. So that took quite a bit of work, and they're still working on that. I'm going to come back to the faculty standard in a second, because I want to talk about the assessment system. The assessment system was just not very good. Part of that was the mismanagement prior. They had a really strong, for a number of years, they had a very, very strong assessment team, committee, and a strong assessment director. They were doing great work in assessment, and that was all disbanded. Well, that's been rebanded, if you will. So they have a halftime release assessment director. They have their full assessment committee. So Jean, the assessment director, and this team have been putting back together their assessment system aligned with that conceptual framework. So again, these things, they really tie together. The other issues, the other compliance issues that I want to bring up are kind of technical issues. And clinical, the clinical requirement is basically how do you manage the pre-student teaching and student teaching clinical experiences for the teacher candidates. There's a requirement in law that every student teacher must undergo a mock evaluation where they are evaluated according to the Iowa teaching standards. That gets them ready for moving into teaching. And it's a great requirement. Some programs, this is one of them, did a mock interview instead of a mock evaluation, didn't use the standards. You know, they fixed that when we were there. So moving forward, that was fixed. We didn't think that was such a big deal. The other place we saw compliance issues, and we're going to see this in the next program too, is with the 40-hour requirement. Every faculty in teacher preparation is required to spend 40 hours over the course of 5 years in schools, in P-12 schools, to maintain recency on best practices, what's going on in those P-12 schools. They had several of their faculty, and it's part-time faculty. Their full-time faculty was fine. It's their part-time faculty. A number of their part-time faculty didn't have the 40 hours completed. But COVID hit, and schools, P-12 schools, aren't allowing faculty or students, for that matter, into schools. So during last year, we had a governor's proclamation that allowed us to waive the requirement for the students to go into P-12 schools, but we didn't ask for or do a waiver of those 40 hours. So some of their part-time faculty couldn't get in. They've since fixed that as well. So I just want to mention they have a good policy in place. It's just the action on that policy didn't happen for their part-time faculty, for some of their part-time faculty. Like I said, there were no compliance issues in social work or speech language path. We are bringing this as an entity, as one educator preparation program. So we're asking you to approve their teacher prep, their speech language path, and their social work as one entity. Based on the work that they've done since then, and by putting Jean in that position and by appointing the person that they did with the release time that they did for assessment, we recommend to you that you provide them full approval. And I'm here, I'll be happy to answer any questions about process. And again, we have their director, Dr. Jean Betchen, on the Zoom from Davenport with you.
Once the board takes action on this, if it's approved, then is there follow-up on the DE as far as?
Yes, sir. So what the process, this is an ongoing process. It's every 7 years, every program goes through approval. We normally start a program up about 2 years before their site visit review. They do a self-study, they write an institutional report, we do a series of reviews, and then we do a site visit, we do a report, we bring it to you. If you grant full approval, then a year from now, we visit that program and we do a follow-up. So Miriam and I will go to St. Ambrose and we'll go through everything that's on this report, everything they said they've done and they're going to do, and we verify that. And we bring that back to the state board we do an annual report to you, and we just wrap that into there for all the programs that we do. Then every program is required to do a report to us every year on numbers and a lot of issues, qualitative issues that we ask them to report on. And this is one of them. So St. Ambrose, for instance, will get their template for their report. We'll say, here were these issues. What are you doing this year to continue on these issues? So the idea is we're bridging that gap between 7 years. A lot of follow-up. Yes, sir.
Larry, you go back 7 years and look at what happened 7 years ago? And are these the same issues that we were dealing with 7 years ago? And now we're dealing with these issues again? That's something you do.
We do.
Okay.
We do. And in this case, it's a unique, the issues are unique this time. What we saw 7 years ago from St. Ambrose was 40 hours. And as you know, we see that fairly often, but I fully believe that if COVID didn't impact it this time, for this program and the next one, you're going to see there would not be a 40-hour issue. So these are unique issues for St. Ambrose. Since we've redone the standards and redone our process as directed by the board in 2012, we're coming around now. We're starting to do a second review under new process and standards, and we are looking back and seeing things are looking better.
So that's 40-hour standard was there 7 years ago.
Yes, sir.
The difficulty would be if you have new faculty that come on, the amount of time they have to accomplish the same thing.
Correct.
Because they had 7 years to do this.
Correct.
So come on, I mean, if you were there 7 years ago, that should be fulfilled now.
And for full-time faculty, that is not an issue.
Yeah.
It's part-time. You're right. We get somebody like a retired teacher that we hire to do supervision, well, that's faculty member. And so I retired last year. So if you're in a classroom, you're obviously doing your 40 hours. So they wait a few years and then, oops, I messed up and I didn't get this done, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Kimberly. Kimberly, did you have a question?
I do, thank you. Larry, do we know if St. Ambrose is like a direct, if I could say, pipeline to Davenport school system for educators and administrators? So is there a high percentage? I don't know what's considered high, but do we have a lot of St. Ambrose educators in the Davenport school system, say the last 5 to 10 years?
Jean, you might be better to answer that. We don't track where their graduates go. We track what they do.
In our program here, we have a 30-mile radius for all of our field experience placements. And generally, we do anywhere from 275 to 300 field experience placements each semester. And so that's where the whole process starts with our students and our relationship with the Davenport Community School District. So our students do a great deal of field experience placements, with the end being employment in the area. So we really encourage our relationship with the Davenport Community School District with the whole intention of them starting with field experience and ending in employment in the area. So we have a really great relationship with the school district in that way.
All right, so I guess what I'm asking is based on your graduates of educators and also administrators, do majority of them go to the Davenport school system? What percent, did you know by high level percent range?
Sorry, I don't have an exact number to give you. I would say it's probably a mix. I mean, once we generally we recruit anywhere from Chicago, Peoria, and a little bit of Eastern Iowa. I mean, that's pretty much where our graduates end up. That's diversified a little bit more since COVID. Now we're placing kids in Indianapolis and Minnesota and that kind of thing. It's spread out a little bit more. So the direct impact of Davenport might be a little bit less, but I mean, there's still a lot of great connections there.
Okay, we just have so much information. We have so much connections right now with Davenport. So you're like
Mhm.
that lifeline to for those future educators. So it's very important. You're part of that supply chain, if I could say it. in
Sure.
regards to
And
education.
you should know one of our initiatives in the future is we're working to develop a grow your own program with the district to help and aid in that, what you're talking about. It's a big priority here.
Okay, thank you.
And I should mention that St. Ambrose, up until about 2 years ago, had a principal preparation program that was very successful, but numbers caused them to shut it down. But we would love for them to be able to bring that back.
By numbers, you mean they didn't have
They didn't have enough people in the program to make it sustainable.
I got it. Okay. Are there any more questions?
I could ask a couple. Talk to us a little bit about your follow-up with your teacher prep candidates and what happens to them after they graduate and go out and seek employment. Are all of them being employed? Do you have a tracking system?
Okay.
We do currently have a tracking system. We're currently reviewing it and improving it. We're always challenged with response rate. And once the kids graduate, get licensure, and it's a busy time for them, and keeping track of where they end up. And obviously COVID had a dramatic impact on that as well. I have to say, since I believe it was July of 20, once the law was changed with regard to substitute authorization and just everything with COVID, I mean, our students, they're all being hired. I can't say that we have 100% placement rate, but I basically have spent all summer telling principals, sorry, I don't have any candidates for you. But just our students we've had students with contracts before they've graduated, with offers, I should say. So yeah, it's a really interesting time given the pandemic.
That follow-up include how long are those kids staying in education? I think that's the trick of it, isn't it? We get them hired, can we keep them? And that's been a difficult thing, I think, for them.
Yes, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact number for that. I mean, we have data that's collected through the University of Iowa, but once again, it's just we're not getting a good enough response rate because it's a very liquid pool in terms of where they end up. So that's an area that we're striving to improve in the future. And now that we have our new assessment situation in place and our assessment coordinator, I think that's going to improve dramatically.
Thank you.
Just a quick question for you, Lawrence. Putting together your review team, how do you go about that as far as getting people from colleges and
Sure.
universities?
Sure. We have two teams. We have one first, which is called the state panel, and that's 9 people, faculty members from college universities. They serve 3-year terms, and they don't necessarily go on a site visit, but they read every institutional report, every document that we get. And we do a preliminary review on each program each year. This year, we're doing 4. So those state panel members give us the consistency. They read everything each of those years, and they do a 3-year term. And they're all volunteers. The site visit teams that we use, every January, we put out, we're asking for volunteers. And people will volunteer. We emphasize if you're going to have a review, if you're going to be reviewed in the next couple of years, you should get some volunteers in there. And then what we do is we go through, we match up qualifications. So if, for instance, with St. Ambrose, we needed to make sure we had somebody that had experience with speech language path and with social work, et cetera. So we match those things up. And basically then we just find people that we make sure we have enough people that can fit on that team and make sure that they can find that time. We schedule site visits about 2 years out so that when we ask for volunteers, they know when that is and they know when they can volunteer.
What's the length of the site? Is it when you actually?
We generally get, well, again, we're doing things a little bit different last year and a little bit of this year. But generally, a site visit lasts for the team members about 3 days. We get on site on Sunday afternoon, do a little bit of training, do a little bit of startup work long days Monday, long days Tuesday, and then a half a day or so on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Move that the state board give full approval to St. Ambrose University Educator Prep Program through 27-28.
Second.
Just
Second.
been moved in second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you for what you do.
So now we're going to change the agenda, and hopefully Melissa's come on. And hello, Melissa. Okay. Central College, Pella, Iowa. The chair is Dr. Jennifer Deers, and she, I don't know, a little while ago, she had something happen, wasn't able to be here.
I'm here, Larry.
She is. All right, everybody is here. There's Jen. Okay, so Dr. Jennifer Deers is the chair, Dr. Amanda Clark and Dr. Melissa McInich are faculty at Central College. Central is a 4-year liberal arts college in Pella, and their focus is on experiential learning. One of the things that we always try to bring up with Central College is their Central Teacher Academy, where it's voluntary, but most of their students do it. Where additional to the clinical requirements that we have for them, they'll place them with the teacher over the course of 3 years and do hours and hours and hours and hours in schools working with teachers, gaining that experience. It's almost an apprenticeship. Could be called an apprenticeship. So it's a great model, and it's been very successful for them for a number of years. Central also gets very strong resource support from the institution. The education department has started a couple of years ago, and they can talk about this for you if you like. They started teaching ed courses in the local high school, Pella High School. And those courses transfer into the education program. So they've started doing that. And they've had a big push for diversifying their student body. And they've increased the percentage of students from underrepresented groups to 23% of the student population over the last few years. So, and they've done this in Pella, Iowa. So we're very pleased to hear that. There was basically one issue in the governance standard that was a result. They needed a little bit more oversight over a good experience. They're teaching these courses in the high school, but it wasn't real clear how those high school students are assessed and how that assessment is brought in to the program when they are admitted into the program as a sophomore or junior in college later. So, so that they know that the experiences match what they want them to do. That was an easy, it was an easy lift for them to just resolve that issue. The other issue they had, was part-time faculty, the same thing that I mentioned with St. Ambrose, 40 hours. They had some folks, couldn't get in schools, couldn't get them done. Those have been resolved. That's it. They had no compliance issues in any other standards. And those compliance issues were a low lift, if you will. And we can answer questions.
We still use Praxis as an exit.
Yes.
From the program.
Yes.
And 80%, is it still, we give the director an opportunity to drop that? Is that?
So the way we do that is we set our scores at whatever is the recommended score through a standard setting from Educational Testing Service that runs these. Then by law, the director has the discretion to set that score anywhere she determines, with the intent that looking at any of our surrounding states that use the same test, that our score will not be, and this is in code, in law, our score can be set to be no higher than any other state around us. So if, and this happened when that law came into practice, there were a few states that had a lower score than we did. We lowered our score. And we monitor that and we stay there. When a new test comes in place, tests are regenerated about every 5 or 7 years. We either use the recommended score or I talk to our contiguous states. What are you guys using? And if they're using something lower, we'll go to the director and ask her to lower it.
Can you teach without passing that?
No. Well, yes, you can now.
So I ask.
You can now. So in order to get fully licensed, you have to be a program completer from an educator prep program. In order to be an educator prep program, you have to pass the test, either, whatever test we offer. However, we have a fairly new law that you can get a 1-year non-renewable temporary teaching license that allows you to teach for 1 year while you're retaking the test. So it's a great law. It gives students a chance. They don't have to rush and get it done in June. They have a year to do it. But they can be teaching, be paid in June or in let's say in November, December, they pass the test, then they can just move right on to an initial license and they're done. So it's a good law. We've had a few this year that, it had to be, they lost their jobs because they weren't able to pass the test, but it's helped.
And Central probably doesn't have a huge problem with that. Yeah, I would just say that if I were administrator, which not, I would suspect that Central graduates in the teacher prep program are quite desirable in here. They do a great job.
Yes, sir. And
I would pass that along to you as for my superintendent friends anyway. You produce some great results, for kids. Thank you.
their pass rate is well above the state average.
Yeah, sure.
Just a question for the folks at Central with schools having difficulties finding enough teachers. What's been your experience as far as the number of students that come into your programs in recent years?
As far as the numbers.
Yeah,
that
the numbers, yes.
who want to become educators. We've definitely seen a bit of a dip, but not a huge dip in the number of students that are seeking to be educators. I think we hover around the 35 to 38 program completers per year. And so as someone else mentioned, our alum or our graduates are highly sought after. I have emails that flow in regularly asking if we have anyone without a job, which does not tend to be the case with our program completers. We have around 20 to 30% of our students who will have offers in hand before they're finished student teaching, and most of them before they start their second student teaching placement. So we're still working. We'd like to recruit more students definitely into the field of education. But as you all know, there's some barriers to that. So we're doing the best we can to continue to put out great educators who will remain in the field for a long time.
Do you do any tracking of your graduates, folks that are placed in a secondary or primary school setting? Again, what kind of feedback are you getting? We asked the same question of St. Rose University.
Definitely. And I would echo what Jean said to that question as far as we are doing the best tracking we can. I think we have a pretty good tracking system in that regard, and just that we build up the relationship so much with our students that they want to keep us in know as far as where they're at. I can tell you, we also have a program that we've been blessed with for the Geisler-Penquit scholarships. And we've been providing scholarships to students, a 2-year renewable scholarship that they get as a junior or a senior since 2011. And we've tracked all of those scholars. And I recently gave a report to their board. We have about 100 students who've received that scholarship since 2011. And I would say over 90% of those students are still teaching in the field and still continue. We have students, I would say our primary placements are in the state of Iowa. We have students teaching in all 99 counties across Iowa, but also we are seeing students who are going more nationally into teaching placements and even international placements. So.
Yeah, thank you. Again, thank you for what you do. It's my sense of it that if kids aren't prepared, they won't stay in education. I think you have a remarkable record. Congratulations.
Thank you.
From your professional opinion, we talked about the praxis test. Do you see that as a valid and reliable test as far as predicting who will be a good teacher or not?
I'll defer to Melissa, my colleague, on that one. She can answer that.
Yes, I do still think it's a very valid measure of their knowledge of content and pedagogy. And we have a very high pass rate for praxis as well.
Yeah, I would second that. Melissa's background and research area is in assessment, and so value her opinion in that regard as well.
Thank you.
Is the knowledge content or pedagogy, is that the most difficult for kids? Is it?
I teach in secondary education, and so I can't speak as much for the elementary. I think that neither one necessarily is more difficult. It's just a different type of knowledge.
Yeah, I would agree. I think our candidates are very well prepared for that test, but probably even more so just for the field of education in both knowledge and pedagogy. So we don't see any issues in our students being able to pass either of those tests.
Any other questions?
We've talked about equity quite a bit at the board level, and how has your recruiting efforts been to recruit minorities into the program?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely an ongoing goal for us, especially being here in Pella, Iowa, about 40 miles from Des Moines area. The college, as Larry mentioned, has had tremendous progress in our recruiting efforts in diversity across campus and thinking broadly about diversity. We have put that as one of our goals for this upcoming year. And just to speak to some of the administrative support that we have now, our administrators have actually approved that Melissa become chair of the program, and I am promoted to a directorship program so that we can focus more specifically on that and continue our many partnerships with external, not only K-12 partners, but also other organizations across the state to hone in specifically on recruiting a more diverse teaching field.
On that same pathway, does your upper bound students, I know you have an upper bound talent search program on campus, is that a feeder into to help with your diversity pipeline?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Melissa again on that one. She actually teaches in the Upward Bound program and is involved in that program.
Yes, I'd say we see Upward Bound alum in their last year. We call it the Bridge program as they're transitioning to college. We see students every year who decide to go into education, and some of those choose to come to Central College. So I always do a little extra cheer of excitement when we see that someone's
that's a great opportunity.
Got one now in music education that's an Upward Bound alum. So.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity. You don't have to do a lot of work. They're already coming on campus. And from my understanding, I knew the director of that program. You start at 6th grade. So that's you have, I believe you're almost in every school, and you're all over that's all over the state you guys recruit. So I think that's a great pathway to keep it visible if possible.
Right, it is a fantastic program.
I would move that we accept and approve Central's college prep program through
A second.
27, 28.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Mm.
All right, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, get back to my agenda. Slate proposal process. And Thomas is back.
I'm back. I am sending Shan Seibert's regrets. She's under the weather today, and or she and I had planned that she would do most of the presentation and I would nod knowingly like, So now I've got to do it all by myself. The legislative proposals process for the coming legislative session is that window is almost closed because of what is required for this, for a state agency
It's online.
to, oh, Shan, hi, Shan.
Hi, Shan.
Shan will hopefully not talk unless she's correcting me. She needs to rest the voice.
Oh,
For this coming legislative session, to be part of the governor's legislative package, the governor approves state agency legislative asks because we are executive branch. We're both the board and the department are part of the executive branch. That would require having something August-ish. So mid-September, the asks, any ask that comes in right now that it would need to be technical and not substantive, like a code correction or a let's rescind the program that hasn't been used since the 90s. I'm working on one of those right now. More substantive proposals, such as the one that was perhaps mentioned today about allowing sibling groups to open and roll out together. That would require some thought throughout the year. And planning about like where the lines would be drawn. Is it sibling groups in all situations, sibling groups with certain circumstances only? The department and the board work best as far as legislation when we work together. And the ideal situation would be the board has some legislative priorities that align with the department's work that the board and the department can jointly put together or put forward together. There may be times, since reasonable people can differ, where a board proposal and a department proposal might not be in complete alignment, might not be in any alignment. In that case, I think prudence dictates that the board and the department try to flesh out any disagreements, because any policy disagreement between the board and the department is a wedge that could be exploited. So using today's discussion as an example, for the next legislative session, for the legislation, the session that gavels in after the November 2022 election, so January 2023, if this were to be a department proposal to allow, if there's bullying and harassment, to allow the entire like sibling group to open and roll out, that's something that we would probably want to work on with the department to make it part of a joint legislative ask. If in the exercise of independent judgment, the department and the board have different legislative priorities, I don't think that there's going to be staff support for the board to advance its own priorities. It would be an odd ask. Dear department staff, please help us advance a legislative agenda that the department itself disagrees with. I just don't think that would be a reasonable ask for my colleagues. So, just quick storyboard going forward, substantive proposals. The ideal case is the department and the board are in alignment and agreement, and we can speak with a single voice. If that is the case, the deadline for substantive changes is ideally the summer before the session. So for a session that gavels in January, early January, have these substantive discussions almost concluded, have the text almost ready to go before school starts. And then that time between school starts and the start of the legislative session is a time where fiscal questions can be answered. technical questions could be answered. Does this conflict with other law that might need to be amended? What's the butterfly effect of this change? What else would need to be changed? What administrative rules would need to be changed? So to allow for non-technical changes, if the state board is bringing to the department a legislative ask of its own initiative, rather than adopting an ask that the department puts forward, adopting and endorsing and agreeing with. If the state board is bringing something to the department of its own initiative, the summer before the session, to allow all the hard questions to be asked and answered. Because taking today's discussion as an example, there might be counter arguments to allowing sibling groups to open and roll out. There might be a fiscal impact. There might be where do we draw the line? What does that do to athletic eligibility for the sibling who was not harassed versus the sibling who was harassed? Those types of questions ought to be asked and answered before the first subcommittee meeting on any legislation, because subcommittee meetings are not times for surprises for state agencies. So with that, Shan, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But the ideal state is that the department and the board work together, and the board initiates a proposal that the board wants the department to consider summer before the session.
And it's my understanding that the governor would approve all of the proposals that we have in order for it to be.
In order to be filed by a state agency, the governor's office approves state agency filings. So a member could always introduce at any time without separation of powers. A member could always introduce legislation of his own volition. But if it comes from a pre-filed bill filed by a department, a board, or a commission, that has to be approved by the governor's office.
And one thing that will be helpful this year that will be different is that document we prepared for you that aligns with all of our goals. Because some of the things that Thomas is pointing out, you might have some idea in isolation, but you have to understand how it fits in with everything else. So as you look at those links and the information that we have, you have a priority that you'd like to introduce a potential change like the one we were talking about now. You got to see where it fits in everywhere else. And you have access to that now more so than we did before. And you have it aligned with what our priorities might be. So hopefully that will help a little bit too, as we identify how we might want to move forward with some of these.
I don't disagree with anything that Tom said, and I just feel like sometimes when we look at legislatively, that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. Looking at different topics, but it always seems like we always hear about legislative action or proposed legislative action when the department is ready to have us act on it, so to speak. And so I'm not sure if there's a communication process along the line that you have legislative ideas or proposals you're working on. I don't think we really hear about them until let's have a public hearing about it.
And part of that might be, there's two different ways it comes to you. There's the ones that we introduce, and there's the 100 others that we get brought into, and you would have to respond to both. So when we talk about legislative action, it's not just the things that we propose. And so
I'm more concerned about what the department.
Yeah, and those, I mean, we can double check, but those are shared, prior to even any submission, but maybe we need to have a different level of a conversation with the board to ensure that you guys fully understand what's being introduced.
Has there ever been, I'm only a couple of years around here, has there ever been a state board of ed legislative proposal without
There hasn't
being joined in by the department?
There hasn't in Iowa.
Okay.
It's
and the reverse. Have there been DOE legislative proposals that the board was actively, to follow up on John's, against?
Not in my memory. Because
we all have the same goal here, right? So, it seems like, when we talked about a committee before, that if some part of the board needs a deeper dive to help you, all of you, maybe, I mean, you know, not everybody has. Some people that might have more interest in that than others, and that could be then just a report, you know, that we get, but 2, 3 people here know about it intimately. I mean, I for one, can't imagine a scenario where we would diverge. But I guess anything's possible, but I would like to hope that we would have a precedent that we wouldn't do that.
And
That, I mean, that would look bad.
I don't think
for
we
all of
ever,
us.
I mean, I feel like there've been topics, I think that there's probably topics that maybe have come up that maybe individuals maybe didn't support. But collectively, we've never really had,
That's different.
yeah, but collectively, I don't even think we've really had discussions about a lot of the legislation maybe. So I don't know. I guess I would say I don't really know. Because I think that there are things that, you know, we know about, some things that we, you know, so I think this is a good process to have in place just so that we're aware. And honestly, I would say that, you know, like right now at Iowa Workforce Development, you know, like we spend the summer kind of going to our respective kind of as like the attorneys or the legislative folks. So we have to ask, you know, we have meetings with the different parts of the agency saying like, what legislative proposals do you have? And then we have to submit those to the director. And then, you know, so maybe, you know, in the summer, we can say what kind of legislative proposals does the state board want to kind of come up with? And then we can kind of have that broader discussion, because we never even like discussed about, you know, legislative proposals or anything like that, or talked about the different areas that, you know, and even in our goals and priorities, like each one, you know, what legislative proposals are coming up or anything like that. I think that would be helpful to just knowing, you know, what legislative changes, whether they're substantive or what, you know, just maybe like, you know, minor changes. I think it would be helpful to just know what's coming up the pipe, because I think probably, I'm assuming you guys have a similar process where each probably area has legislative proposals that they want to make changes to. So maybe just being aware of what's happening, because I don't even think we're really aware until session hits.
But
And we have those
anything we
legislative
would do
updates.
would have to go through the governor's office in the end, right? I mean, do you go to the legislature directly without the governor?
So we're an executive branch.
That's what I mean.
So, yeah, it would
So
have to be.
everything
Not an
falls up
independent
through there,
agency.
right?
Correct.
So she'll do
Yeah.
a budget, or he'll do, you know, whoever
Yeah.
it is, will do a budget or have a legislative.
so you know, my discussion was more of a framework. The ideal state is the most typical state. But I'm sensitive to things that have happened to my job alikes in other states where the state board sued the director, the state board sued the governor.
And so, and I think it really.
It's so like, if there's a divergence of opinion, let's do everything we can to make it, because a divergence of opinion, a divergence of priorities is harmful to both the board and
Yeah.
the department.
And other states are set up differently. I mean, that's the thing, whether I'm an elected,
Elected,
some are elected, so it's a whole, so
Some
it
are,
isn't a
yeah.
comparable, but I
Yeah.
think, you know, Thomas is trying to just, you know, talk about the functions of each entity and what it looks like.
If you're passionate about an issue, it's always your local legislator can introduce anything for you.
Yep.
Your senator or your state rep, my goodness, if that becomes an issue.
Yep.
Because we can't get unanimity
Yeah.
with all the people involved.
I guess I'm not really looking at, oh, this code needs to be corrected because of legislative action. That's neither here nor there, but I guess personally, and I'm speaking for myself, board, I would like to know what the legislative proposals are from the department for the coming session.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
So this is my new voice, but I'm gonna try to explain a little bit. So right now, Renee, the legislative liaison, she has formulated all of our policy proposals that we plan to present to the governor's office. And so at the department, we've talked about those proposals. We will make tweaks to them. Then we go to the governor's office, and there are a lot of iterations that go back and forth. And so it would probably make sense for us to share that legislative agenda to you at your November board meeting. At that time, we would have a much more firmed up legislative agenda as to what we're going to be moving forward. We can probably also discuss at some point in time budget request as well, but that's kind of in the initial stages too. So right now we're in the planning stages, and as Brooke had talked about earlier, as a state agency, we go through the summertime, finding out, through the different bureaus in the department what they want to put forth, and then we have separation of policy and of budget. So I think putting something on the November agenda would probably be timely and would be helpful for you guys to know what we're going to be bringing to the legislature next session.
And
For the coming session, an updated November, but anything beyond that, if it's a state board ask, it needs to be part of that discussion that Shan mentioned, that Brooke mentioned regarding workforce development in the summer prior to the session.
Correct.
But if those
Yeah.
can be solidified by August, would that be enough time to have those proposals ready by then?
Well, August is the start of the start. It's the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. It's where the proposal gets sort of workshopped through the process that Shannon and Brooke were describing, like where a good policy idea gets made actionable. So between, summer, August, if at the end of that time, it's not convinced it's a good idea, it gets pruned away. But if it is a potential good idea, then it moves forward.
I think part of this too is just to point out how far in advance you have to bring something to the table in order to advance it. And just an awareness of what that looks like. It's not something that can be done, quickly or immediately.
Bigger the organization.
Yeah, and I think the process and the procedure that we have typically followed has kind of fallen off a bit. And that's been one because of last year with COVID and the session being in the middle of the summer, as well as there's been several years that the department has only put forth technical corrections bills. And those are typically not things that we're going to bring to the board. So when it's actually solid policy bills and budget ask, those are things that we bring to the board.
My follow-up question was, so I feel like the Department of Education, like she said, is not sometimes just making only code change proposals, but there's a lot of other bills that are going to be happening throughout the session. And is there a special session this fall? Like
For redistricting.
for redistricting? And then, I don't know, that's a different topic altogether.
Yeah.
But within that, there are a lot of proposals that are going to affect the education system and the Department of Education quite a bit that the Department of Education is not proposing. And so what role do we play as people who are going to be dealing with the consequences of that legislation in like being aware of what's happening while the session is in session and while these bills are being introduced? Because I feel like a lot of the bills last year, we didn't hear about until it was time for us as a board to approve the recommendations or to look at the recommendations that the Department of Education had to make for those bills.
One thing I would say to that is we have a bill tracker and we share that with you. So when
Yeah.
we send those weekly updates, you can check that anytime and it's always updated. So, what I would encourage you to do is look at them because
Yeah,
they
yes,
change
I
every
would.
day. And it usually has the link, it has the bill language, it has the status. So that's how you would know.
Okay, and so then is there room for us to have discussions about those at our board meetings? Because I know that that's more of an individual basis, and if we wanted to take any collective action, we would need to have it not on an individual basis and to have a discussion about that as a whole board.
Well, are you looking at something where the board collectively support or not support so much?
That's what I'm not sure. I'm a high schooler. I'm not exactly sure what the law looks like in.
Perhaps Director Lebo would want to be our spokesman for.
And I don't even know what that would honestly look like with sort of the amount of times that the board engages, we meet, and the pace with which these changes
Yeah.
move forward. It would be very difficult to try and engage in a meeting within the window when something would advance, have conversation about it. I mean, so I think that really is, and again, I don't know to what extent that is the role of an agency or of a board, not the agency. Our agency staff, during session are on call nonstop because we can have notice. Is it 24 hours notice, Shan, when there could be a meeting? Yeah.
Maybe.
and so-
less than that.
Maybe.
And
Yeah,
so
maybe the
that's
night
why we
before,
are,
yeah.
sort of all hands on deck, trying to engage the board within that process would be very difficult.
And so I think.
Time that happened, I remember was with Mary Ellen. And that was with assessments. but she, I feel like, was at the Capitol every week. And she kept track of that, and she would go to Senate committee meetings and met with legislators about that. So that was when, with the assessment.
Was
that was-
she a board member?
She was.
Okay.
And she was part of an assessment committee. at the
Committee.
Department. So she was wearing multiple hats, like involved in a committee
So she's
appointed by the department, but also in
That was one of our,
personal capacities.
that was one of our priorities at that time, was working on that. And so she was meeting with us. So I mean, she was up at the Capitol quite a bit and was on call and could kind of be accessible. And she had another job that kind of placed her to be at the Capitol as well, quite a bit. So, but to
she
have a
wasn't just
person,
there as a independent board member engaging in that work. She was
No.
there because of her other.
yeah, but also because it was a priority of the board. And so that was something that we, talked about a lot and really wanted to see. And so we were kind of, but she could be there, which was nice because she could go to the committee meetings and talk to legislators and things like that. But she could push forward kind of our agenda because she knew what it was, and she's, the whole board, we, made that a priority.
Responding to legislation as it's happening. Such legislation not being department/board priorities, I think would just there would be multiple logistical gates that need to be worked through, including timing of state board meetings versus the first and second funnel, timing of subcommittee hearings, timing of committee of the whole, amendments from the floor, as well as who would do that lobbying if it was the board versus the department. The department registers neutral on nearly every bill other than the ones that the department sponsors. And so you have to whole nother question. Legislative proposal, I think we've got a pretty good framework about working with, but responding to non-DE education related legislation, it's broader than 15 minutes.
It does sound like what I'm hearing is just a better sense up front of what the department is presenting and just reminders of the frequency of how to track everything. And we can maybe do a better job of just connecting with you.
I'd really like to elevate Shan and Renee in the updates that they do. Shan and Renee as her successor, they do a great job of like almost real time what's happening in the two chambers. So, and the Friday updates are invaluable. I use them to sort of double check my own work to make sure I didn't forget anything. So read those when they come out and they're posted. They stay posted through the rest of the session.
Certainly as legislators look at who's registered for and against, I think there's sort of the assumption that the board would probably be on board with what their department, these are department.
Yeah, because we don't have a
It's sort of
separate.
assumption. Yeah, I mean, there's no,
We don't have a registered lobbyist. We don't have a separate, I don't even think we can register for a bill for it against it.
well, I don't think we ever have.
Yeah. I don't think we're an entity that can do that. I don't think we, yeah.
Logistically,
Yeah, the
really
department
hard
would
to
do, yeah, yeah.
Timing wise.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a lot of logistics, obviously, that would be insurmountable, but
Yeah.
one thing that would be maybe beneficial if, in the eyes of the department, is as proposals are being formulated, Shan talked about no proposals relate or maybe don't relate to what our goals are as far as the board is concerned.
I think that I like the idea, and I think it should be, so these proposals are aligned with this proposal. So those people who are on that, kind of who are focused on those goals, maybe they want to track that during the session. So that they can kind of focus on those board priorities or whatever. So, for people who are doing achievement gap, these are the ones that you want to focus on. If we have, mental health, then that's another one that maybe you want to focus on. Career and technical education, maybe those people want to focus on that. I also think maybe just because I think that if you want more real-time information, I think that just being able to go to the website and just, the LSA site or the whatever is, for the Iowa General Assembly, and being able to track bills like in real time and see when subcommittees, like if you want to attend something or, just see what's happening, see how people voted, how legislators voted, who's registered for and against. I mean, we use that stuff all the time and it gives you real-time updates on what's happening. So just maybe, does everyone here know how to use that website and use it often? So I mean, maybe just a little bit of an education on that and just, if people want to do that. if you're interested in a piece of legislation, just being able to go and type it in, being able to see what's, tracking the legislation and being able to see the bill and different versions of it. Amendments and everything, so.
And actually, as the legislative liaison, Renee is open and willing to answer any questions that anybody has about a bill, where it's at in the legislative process, how we're registered, how other people are registered, how we see that bill moving forward. I mean, that's part of what her job is.
Well, we have 10 duties if you look at our website, and one of them is to advocate on major educational issues to the exec or legislative branch. So I would imagine that your office or Shan or Renee or somebody's telling us, here's something major if we don't already know.
Yeah.
I don't think we're in the minutia or the weeds of this day to day. I don't think that's part of what this is about.
But I think we didn't hear about the big stuff until it was too late. The stuff that affected our board priorities, and those are things, if there are laws like legislation that it's aligned with our board priorities, at least having updates on it specifically, like saying, hey, this is aligned with your board priority, here's what's happening with it, I think would be good for us as a board to be aware of.
And Renee does, and prior to her, Shan, during the session, there's a dedicated spot on the agenda. And I think that would be the time to interrogate specific legislative proposals. How does this fit with and without our priority? There's a feedback loop built in during the session for Renee's legislative updates. So maybe that's one way you deploy the new tools in your toolbox about, taking action on your priorities. There's an opportunity there. I just think that the infrastructure is there. Let's use this new tool with that standing agenda item during the session.
But I also think, again, tracking legislation, if you are really interested in something, if you want, because I think that it's great to have the update even every Friday, but sometimes things happen so quickly and things can change really quickly. Just having that real time, being able to look at things on a daily basis and track them. Sometimes you just need to do that. So sometimes, so much can happen in a week. Funnel week and so I think it's just good to be able to go to the website and just click on it and just see what's happening.
Yeah, to me, it's not the real-time information, it's the planning and proposals ahead of time, which I'm more concerned about. Yeah, there's an abundance of information, just.
Yeah.
If you want to find something, you'll find it.
There's plenty of information.
And I think it's important to bring up too, during the legislative session, there are literally hundreds of education bills. And if you look at what ends up passing at the end of the legislative session in comparison to the amount of bills that are actually active throughout the legislative session, it's a fraction of them. So there are a lot of bills that we just have experience in that we know this bill probably will not go anywhere. And so we don't give that bill as much of attention as we may perhaps give another bill that we think will move. So once again, that's part of what, Renee's job is at the department. And like Thomas has said, I think, with her legislative updates, she's outlining the bills that need to be paid attention to.
Thank you, Shan.
Take a Sucrets or.
Drink some warm tea.
You want me to sing you a song or something?
Oh, wow. That would be lovely, but we gotta go.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shan. Feel better.
Thanks, Shan. So now we're a little behind. The food is here. The next item is State Board Authority regarding public comment. And then after that is the scheduled lunch. I defer to you would like to proceed.
I could jam this into as much time as you give me.
Have 2 minutes.
Okay. Public comment is discretionary. There's nothing in the open meetings law that requires public comment. Public comment is just that, comment. It is not an open dialogue. The reason that it's not an open dialogue is the state board, when it takes action based on notice and an opportunity to be heard. The state board does not have the inherent authority to switch policy on a dime. It requires notice of intended action to do a rule. If a policy change is made through a contested case, like the open enrollment discussion today, it is with notice to the parties that they will be heard at a specific point in time. So whenever there is something that the public says that you as a body want to react to, it's at a subsequent meeting to allow the public to be noticed through an agenda that that item will be discussed. You are in control of the agenda, your own agenda. The department and you develop the agenda. The public does not control your agenda. The public can say, I want you to talk about X. Well, I want $1 million. What I want for your agenda versus what you want to put on your agenda are two different things. I've given you your internal operating procedures on public comment items 2 and 3. Under B, public participation, flesh that out a little bit more. If you want to take action on an idea that the public brings to you during public comment, work with department staff to make sure that it gets on the next agenda or a subsequent agenda, but more importantly, to make sure the idea that sounded good is actually good. And to avoid the butterfly effect or avoid conflicting with legislation or prior board precedent. So public comment is a safety valve. It's an incubator for possible ideas, but it does not require, and it is not really allowed to give that an immediate response. So if public comment relates to a matter that's not on the agenda, I remember a board meeting last year where somebody was talking about how his son got expelled off of the bus. Had nothing to do with any of the agenda items on that day, but okay, thank you for your comment. With that, I'm the last speaker between you and lunch, and I thought that the public comment just kind of falls under that framework. If it's important enough to discuss, it's important enough to put on the agenda and let the public know that that's where that's the route the discussion is going to take.
Yeah. And I appreciate the links to Tom Miller's office. Those were helpful as well. I always told my board members it's not a public meeting, it's a meeting held in public. There's a difference.
Any other questions for me or for staff?
All right.
I tried my best to get you back on.
Good job. Thank you. All right. So lunch and then we'll come back for board reports.
Yeah, do you want to do like designate amount of time just to eat and then do the board reports so we're not kind of doing both at the same time? Do you want 20 minutes to eat and then we come back at 12:20? We'd be 5 minutes behind. Well, that would be behind for Davenport.
Yeah.
And do board reports. They're here, but I think it's okay if we adjust.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Then we could just eat.
Okay.
I'm not talking.
Okay.
David will be back at 12:20. And I will let Davenport know.